everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to this regular hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, November 9th, 2015. I'm Paul Krikorian, joined by my colleagues, Mr. Bonin and Mr. Kretz, and we're ready to begin. We're going to go ahead and take all right, so we're going to go ahead and proceed with item 5 first, if we could.
Item 5 is communications from the Mayor and the City Ethics Commission relative to the appointment of Mr. Brian Pendleton to the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners for the term ending June 30th, 2018.
Hi.
Mr. Pendleton, good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you.
So if you could just start by telling us a little bit about your background and how it fits in with the work that you anticipate doing on the Commission.
Wonderful. I virtually lifelong Los Angelian, grew up in the West San Fernando Valley, live in the Hollywood Hills now. Have run a business here in Los Angeles for the past 14 years. Recently, a few years ago, sold my company to private equity. Put that money in the stock market, obviously very well versed in making sure money is managed well, sensitive to fees, etc. It feels very similar to what we would be doing, but with obviously a much larger dollar amount.
Great. Well, you touched on one of the subjects that's very important to me for our pension commissioners, and that is how much we spend on management fees and so forth. And have you had an opportunity yet to look at the history of the fund to see where there might be potential savings that you might, and I don't want to ask you to itemize them, but yes. I mean, do you have some general thoughts about that?
Everyone is fee sensitive. I personally went through an RFP recently to find a new money manager for myself. I've spent a lot of time reading reams of paper on what has happened historically, but I'm probably premature for me to say I found the golden ring for you.
Well, I'm sure that your investment experience will come in very handy in trying to identify those places where we can realize savings for the benefit of our retirees.
I think it can be very helpful, and obviously I want to make sure that it's a solid platform for the retirees for the future.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't also say, as I always say, that the assumed rate of return that our pension funds determine is appropriate for projecting future earnings has an immediate effect on the general fund of the city as well. And yes. I don't have any influence over your ability to make an independent judgment on that. I would just say that I hope that when those questions do come before the Commission that you would look at historical trends in the marketplace, and I think most people would find doing that the assumed rates of return that we have had for our pensions are not overly optimistic. They are consistent with the historical returns that the market has always delivered. And some people out there in the opinion world have tried to suggest that the assumed rates of returns are significantly too high. I think the historical record of investments by these actual pensions, as well as the market as a whole, put the lie to that. So it's my editorial comment. You don't need to respond, but just know that that's important. Members, any questions?
Well, I think you took the same editorial comment that I try to make with appointees to our pension systems, that if you look at just protecting retirees and not protecting current employees who may be laid off, et cetera, by unnecessarily conservative rates of return, and then the city general fund being rated to fill them, I think you're missing out on at least an opportunity to help some of the same people. And I think, as Mr. Krikorian does, that while there is an effort to keep making this a more and more conservative rate of return, there's nothing historically that seems to be based on. So I appreciate you taking that into consideration as you do your job. Otherwise, I think you're very qualified, and we're happy to have you serve in this capacity.
Thank you.
Mr. Bonner?
Okay. Thank you.
All right. If there's no objection, then it would be the recommendation of this committee to advance Mr. Pendleton's appointment to council and recommend confirmation.
Indeed.
So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Congratulations on this step, and hopefully things will go well in council as well. Thank you for your willingness to serve. All right. That brings us to item number 6, and as people are approaching on item number 6, I'd like to call Wayne Spindler on that matter, please.
Item number 6, the Bureau of Street Tree Services report relative to transferring budgeted funds in the total amount of $6.5 million for contract tree trimming supervision, and staff overtime for on-demand tree trimming.
Yes, I think this is a little bit excessive. You can go to the San Fernando Valley in Paul Koretz's district, and there's many men out there trimming a lot of trees. And they have cards, and they give you out business cards. And they're doing this work for very reasonable amounts of money. And I think you should get some of the staff members for Koretz's staff, for example, to go out on a pilot program and hire some of these people on an as-needed basis and compare the cost of that hiring to this cost. And I think you'll see a 49 to 70% less expenditure rate. And you can take the money for these tree trimming demands and transfer the money from the street furniture fund back over to general to give it for tree trimming services. So there's a lot of people out there trimming trees right now, and they're looking forward to meeting the council and getting those contracts. Trim those trees.
Thank you. Molly Rhodes? Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Councilman. I would like to say on behalf of SEIU 721, we're very pleased to see that you're investing in city forces with the $1 million, half for supervision, half for field staff. We wish it was more. We wish we could also have the 1.5, but, you know, it's progress from where we were, certainly. I do want to flag many of you who are on other committees know that language is coming forward that you'll be reviewing, I hope, next week on a jobs program and service restoration program, and tree trimming is very much integrated into that. So in my ideal universe, you would give the department the $1 million, and you would park the 1.5 in the UB for next year for more positions. But thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is someone from Street Services here to?
Good afternoon, council members. Ron Lorenzen, Bureau of Street Services. How are you all today?
Good. How are you?
Good, sir. Thank you. What you have before you is a request from the Bureau of Street Services to take some of the money from the unappropriated balance of the city's budget and to place it back into the Bureau's budget for doing the following. We're requesting that $500,000 be allocated for what we call on-demand trimming for the 15 separate council districts, much as we did last fiscal year, where each council district would receive an equal apportionment of that money, approximately $33,000 apiece, to do trimming in consultation with the council offices and the Bureau to attack those areas of your council districts that you felt where it would be most appropriate. The second $500,000 goes towards one of Councilman Bonan's favorite issues, which is the oversight of the contracts that are actually going on right now, which is the $4 million that was already appropriated. That is for the 6 people that are still here from last year to oversee the contracts, those 6 supervisors, to continue to fund those positions that will oversee the contracts. The last 1.5, as the union has indicated, we are asking that be used, because it's so late in the year, to perform an additional $1.5 million of contract tree pruning. The Bureau is prepared with locations to do that, if we get the okay to do that. We can have those contracts included in, those locations included in the contracts as we move forward. Those contracts are well on their way to being executed. We are shooting for the first of the new year to have those contracts out on the street with actual trimming being performed. If you add that $1.5 million, it will not lengthen that process at all. We will just add the locations that we have already collected to utilize that $1.5 million and add that into the current contracting process so that we could do that. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you. Members, Mr. Kretz.
So when will the on-demand tree trimming actually start?
As soon as we get the money. We have the locations. We've already worked with your offices. We have enough locations that we can actually start trimming as soon as the money is allocated. We will start probably the following weekend after the allocation is made.
And how do we hold contractors accountable for not properly trimming trees? Because my typical experience is people will complain endlessly about not getting their trees trimmed, but when they get their trees trimmed, then they complain even more aggressively because they do an invariably bad job.
Good question, Councilman. And last year we made tremendous strides. Thank you very much for getting the money so we could get the extra people to be on top of the contractors a little bit better. If in fact the contractor does not perform according to the compliance of the specifications, there is I won't get into the process exactly, but basically they are given a couple of notices to correct, and if they do not do so, then we can hold them in abeyance as not performing the contract specifications, and we can ask the board then to remove that contractor. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. What we would like to do is just to be out there with the contractors every day to make sure as they prune on their contracts that they're performing the specs as we would have them perform.
So basically just doing a bad job, does that come under what you're talking about?
If they do not, if you called us and said there's a tree that wasn't trimmed to the contract specifications.
Well, I don't know what the specifications are, but if I'm a typical resident, people will come through, they'll do the trimming, and they'll say, oh, all our trees were hacked. They did a really bad job. Why did they do that? I don't know if it's to the specifications or not, but it's not the kind of job we used to get.
The specifications are very clear. We use the best management practices of American National Standard Institute and the International Society of Arboriculture. It's very clear. If they don't prune to those specifications, and it also says that some trees need more pruning than other trees because of certain instances with different types of trees. Councilman Krikorian's actually been out with us in the street to see some of those instances where we might have to trim more. If they don't, we have a process that we bring the contractor in, we reprimand the contractor. The only recourse we have after reprimand is to then find them in noncompliance with the contract and would have the contract stopped. We would rather meet with the contractor and get them to comply in the future. And again, as I said, I think since last year's allocation of funding that there has been great improvement. I'm not saying it's perfect yet. That's probably not true. But we are staying on top of the contractors much more than we ever were because of the 6 people that were hired, and we will continue to try to improve upon that program.
And how about what we're actually being charged? I know at least at one point we thought we were getting charged more than we would have if we were doing it in-house because people realized they were the only game in town. Is that kind of still the case, or is that coming back out of the stratosphere?
I'm sorry, Councilman Chris, I didn't hear the first part of what you said.
We have been told before that contract prices, because we didn't have the competition of our own folks, were really getting out of hand and were more than what we would have paid for our own in-house people. Is that still the case?
I do not believe that the CAO's office has come forth with that report yet relative to the cost of contracts, relative to the city forces prices. So I couldn't address that, but I can address whether or not the prices seem to be going up or down. Last year seemed to be that big jump from before last year, somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 to $80 per tree to somewhere in the neighborhood of $120 to $135 per tree. We're anticipating this year that the prices will be somewhere around the $130 mark.
That still seems pretty high.
It's high historically. That we can definitely say. Whether or not that's how much it should cost to trim a tree is a different issue. And whether or not the CAO has found that it's cheaper for the city forces to perform it or the contractors to perform it, we still await that report.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield?
And when do we expect that report to come out?
I do not know if the CAO has a representative here, so I could not address that question.
Maybe we'll ask the CAO representative.
Yeah, Councilmember, I actually do not know the answer to when that report is bound to come out. Our staff is at another meeting at this time, so she was not able to attend this meeting today, but I will get that information. We'll report back to you. Sorry.
And then I assume the results of that report will help drive the future decision. I mean, this is a decision, an interim decision, but then for next year's budget, what's the expectation of how the funding will be divided then, or is that really a contingent item on that CAO report?
I do not believe that it's completely contingent upon the CAO's report. I think that the Bureau and many of the city and many of the council members of this body would like to see more tree pruning and more services related to this urban forest, the street tree population, come from city forces. That is the Bureau's position as well. We would dearly love to have our forces built back up. Be nice to go back to where we were before '09, but somewhere in the middle of the old and the new would be a great place for us to be, so that we could start performing, as you've been told before this very committee, by both the union and the Bureau, that the ability of the Bureau provides many things, and here's some of the things it does. Even if we were dollar for dollar, we do provide above and beyond what contractors can provide. First of all, we're extremely flexible. We can move from one place to another very quickly. Second of all, we can address needs as necessary, which has to do with flexibility as well. We are also much better at attacking emergencies, and we know that we are foreseeing many emergencies this year, which we are working on, by the way, and we have actually presented this body with an emergency El Nino report too. But the Bureau really believes that there is a need, not a need, but there is a happy place where we use some contracting and we increase our city forces to provide the city the urban forestry and street tree population needs in particular, that we can actually take care of the forest in a very efficient way, as well as provide the services to our constituency that provides them a safe, accessible public right-of-way.
And in terms of the hiring that we need to do, the testing is underway. Is there anything, what are the stumbling blocks to making that happen as fast as possible?
Right now, the Bureau is hiring tree surgeons. We have some of the positions that were opened up after the recent removal of the managed hiring, and we are able to hire, so we are doing that. We are also seeing some promotions that are actually opening up other openings in our tree surgeon ranks. We don't have very many tree surgeon assistant authorities any longer. What we would like to see is that we would like to have more more regular authority tree surgeon positions on top of hiring the ones that we're hiring now, that we're backfilling the positions that we never let go, that weren't swept. We would like I said, to bring it up. If you would like a report, I'll be happy to provide that soon. That says where would we like to be, but I think the CAO's report's kind of the linchpin in this. Once we get that, we can actually come together with a plan that says this is where we think we can actually use contracting, build up our forces to provide the services that are necessary for this city really to be, as having the largest street tree population in the United States, having the best street tree population.
Thank you.
Just one follow-up on Mr. Blumenfield's question. So the hiring process is such now that you are filling currently funded, budgeted positions that are empty?
Correct.
And do you expect that all of those positions will be filled?
Our intention is to get them all filled. Right now, I believe the most recent report I received, we've filled 6 of those positions. It's not unfortunately, but we just, no matter how many calls for people we put out there, we don't seem to get enough candidates. It's always been a problem. It's not a new problem. So we will continue to do that and continue. There's an ongoing list with tree surgeons specifically, and continue to try through the rest of this year to fill all of those positions that we have that are not filled, and then come to you all in the future to get more authority to hire.
So during the course of this fiscal year, all of the funded positions presumably will be filled, and that there's already funding separate from this $1.5 million to fill those positions.
That is correct.
So this $1.5 million would supplement the hiring process that you already have going on.
That is correct.
Okay.
If we didn't use it for contracting, yes.
And then in a few months, you'll be back here again, and we'll be talking about the urgent need to staff up your department with full-time city employees in urban forestry for the next fiscal year.
I totally agree.
And I expect and hope that that will be at a time when we have the benefit of the cost-benefit analysis that the CAO is preparing, comparing the full costs of contracted services with oversight to city employees and the benefits of each of those things.
Thank you for making that point. We have to look at all the costs of contracting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Bonin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Veron, for the report, and glad to see that we're moving forward with the supervision of the outside contracts. I wish we didn't have to, because I wish we didn't have the outside contracts. I wish it was internal. But Mr. Koretz and I have been saying the same thing for a couple of years. I assume others are hearing the same thing from their constituents about how dissatisfied folks are with a lot of the contract work. So tell me a little bit about how the oversight is going to happen.
How is the oversight going to happen?
Yeah.
Well, the plan is to, well, the plan was last year, we remember right now we have just, I think there's one contract still running, to have the inspector on the site every day with the contractor. That's the plan, to basically stay on top of this so we don't get behind. That is our goal, and that's what we asked to have these people, and that's going to be what happens as we start these contracts this year. The goal is to have an inspector on site, at least for not necessarily 8 hours, but for part of the day, every day with the contractor, talking about what they've done the day before and talking about what they're doing, as well as talking about what they're going to do the next day.
Presumably, they visit more than one work site a day?
That is correct. Our contract inspectors, depending on how many contracts we let,
Right.
Actually, we would like to have one contractor inspector per contract.
Sure.
So that person literally was assigned to that contractor. That in itself can bring problems, though. So we like to not spend all the time with them, but to be with them enough during the day, like I said, to talk about what they've done, to make sure that that is in compliance.
One person per contractor or one person per work site? I imagine we have a contractor who may be working in Mr. Koretz's district and Mr. Krikorian's district on the same day?
Typically, that's not true.
Okay.
Yeah, most of the contractors don't do that. Maybe a couple of the bigger ones could. If that was the case, there'd be a different supervisor inspecting in the two areas. They couldn't obviously be in two places at one time. So, but what we would like to see is that constant oversight, like to use your terminology, at each site. So that there's somebody visiting the site every day and talking about what they did yesterday, what they're doing now, and what's their plan for tomorrow.
So presumably that should eliminate some of the problems we've had. If it doesn't, though, I wanted to follow up on what Mr. Koretz was asking about what sort of the penalty is. I know that if someone's a repeatedly bad contractor, there is an extremely difficult and onerous and, I presume, rarely used process to get them off the contracting list.
You are correct, yes.
But what about whether or not we get a discount or a refund on what we've paid them if they do a lousy job?
We could certainly look into that and rewriting the specifications of the bid, surely.
So do we currently have that provision in there?
What the bid shows right now, and I haven't read it specifically word for word in the last month or two, so if they do not get paid for trees they don't trim. That's number one. They don't get paid for trees they don't trim. We could potentially look at a policy that said, okay, if you improperly trim, you don't get paid. I don't believe that's in the contracts right now. I think you're alluding to something that's like that.
I would recommend, yeah.
Yeah, we could certainly look at rewriting the contract. We could get with General Counsel, Mr. Jordan, for the Board of Public Works and get his opinion on what would have to happen for that to happen. But certainly as we move forward, I think it's a new day. We're actually looking at some ways at potentially having multiple-year contracts that tax us in a little bit of a different way, too, so we don't have to go through this whole contracting process every year, which is extremely time-consuming.
Right.
And many departments involved, and it's a tough process to get through in this city. It's just a long process. So I will certainly broach that topic with Mr. Jordan.
Okay. And on the 1.5 million, how is that going to be allocated? I know that the 500,000 is split sort of evenly between the 15 districts. How's the 1.5 allocated?
the Bureau for the contract money, which is the $4 million plus this 1.5 we're talking about, the $4 million is allocated based on the percentage of the street tree population the council, each respective council office has relative to the entire population. So if you had 10% of the population, which by the way nobody has, but if you did, then you would get 10% of the $4 million, which would get $400,000 worth of trimming in your district. If someone had 5%, they would get $200,000.
And so that would be, that's not going to be sort of problem sites that a council office might call. That would be sort of like a grid system like we're
That is correct. What we call programmatic tree pruning, which is done in a grid because it's the most cost effective. It's not, the 33,000, the on-demand is way less cost effective for both contractors and city forces.
Right.
If we have to move around a lot, it just brings the price per tree up a lot.
So because of the drought, a lot of trees haven't gotten as much water as they ordinarily would have or needed. I know in my area, there's a lot of eucalyptus trees which haven't gotten sufficient watering, and so they're just dropping branches more frequently. We've got El Nino coming, so we know there's going to be a lot of trees that are going to fall. Given that a lot of the trees are, the types of trees are predictably more fragile because of the drought, and we've got the big storms coming, is there any thinking about spending that $1.5 million to address sort of anticipatory needs on the trees that might be most likely to cause problems? I know I have a lot of folks who call stuff in because the eucalyptus is dropping branches and hitting cars and whatever, and some of them qualify as an emergency trimming, some of them don't, but it's a species that, at least from what I know, maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong, is more likely to be imperiled right now. So are we thinking more about addressing what we know a problem is likely to be?
That's a really good question and goes right to the heart of arboriculture and trying to determine which trees need to be pruned. I think a lot of what you see is relative to a phenomenon termed one of two things, either sudden or summer limb drop syndrome. You see a lot of trees drop limbs in the summertime, and so a lot of that does happen with eucalyptus in your district. You have a lot of big eucalyptus trees. All of the research I've ever seen done on that syndrome has never been able to identify whether it's not getting enough water or getting too much water. Whether it could be, they're really not sure which it is. So to state that something is directly attributable to the drought, I think it's still hard for us to do. But what you're asking about, I think is really a more proactive approach of dealing with potential El Nino effects. Yeah. I would be more worried about the heavily foliated trees, those trees like the Indian laurel fig, the ficus, that's still, which are suffering, and I don't mean suffering, they're suffering, they're not doing well with the drought in spite of the drought. Still seem to be very well canopied, very full. Those type of trees in wind and rainstorms are a lot more problematic than trees that don't have a thick canopy because of the rain. So would we use the $1.5 million? We're maybe going to attack it in a different way. I'm actually meeting with the fire department this week about potentially using some of their on-call contracts to use on-call, which we don't have at this point, which we're going to look at, not this budget cycle, but next budget cycle, to see about using some of the money for on-demand services, which might be a better way to use the money and let city staff, and upping city staff. If we had city staff, we could do that. Yeah. But not having the contract nor the city staff, it's a tough place for us to go. So yeah. I know I really haven't answered your question. What we're going to do is concentrate more on those areas once the contracts get going. It'll still be wintertime, hopefully, so we'll still be in the El Nino, to trimming those areas contained in the contract where we think we might have the most tree failure.
Right. I guess the point I'm getting to, and I think you're sort of getting in that direction, is that the grid system is certainly more efficient.
Yes.
In terms of resource allocation, in terms of management. Okay, they're going to be in Cheviot Hills or Westchester or Encino in this particular area. But is that the most effective in terms of caring for the urban forest if we know there's certain types of trees that are particularly fragile right now?
Yeah. Well, when we actually compile a tree grid, it's usually based on those areas that we think there's the most need for trees, not for a demand, not for the demand, but necessarily for the trees. Those would be trees like the big eucalyptus, the big ficus,
Right.
the American sweet gum out in the valley, which are, too, are suffering other things as well. And some of those bigger, the Chinese elm species are large species of trees, and that's where we try to focus as much as possible with the limited contract money we have. So kind of proactively approach it from both ways.
Thank you.
Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, I know I've asked this before, but I'm not sure I really got a pinned down answer. So we have a lot of high caliber tree trimmers in our workforce still. They're just not hired as tree trimmers. Do we have any ability as we rehire to pull some of those folks back in? And to the degree that we don't, in more emergency situations like El Nino trimming, do we have the ability to pull them in from places like DWP or wherever they may have scattered to fill in on an emergency basis?
Since 2009, the Bureau's Urban Forestry Division has lost the bulk of its staff in the tree trimming ranks. That would be tree surgeon and the tree surgeon assistants, from attrition and retirement, and going to places like DWP, as you mentioned. We don't have the ability to ask people to come back from the Department of Water and Power. We haven't lost those people to places like Recreation and Parks or LAWA or the port. They have very, very small forces. It's not a big enough number that would actually impact this. We did have our tree surgeon supervisors go on the program where they actually, I've forgotten the word right now that we called that, transitional workers program. Those were tree surgeon supervisors. That's where most of the people from urban forestry went. But those are the same people that we brought back for those 6 positions for the contracts. We have brought those people back, as well as several other issues. So to directly answer your question, the way we're going to attack, if you're bringing up El Nino and how we're going to deal with that, it goes back to what I discussed the other day in our El Nino preparations, where we're going to utilize the skilled tree surgeons to do tree work, where they actually have to maybe get off the ground, get up into the trees, and we're going to augment that with all of the rest of the bureaus. We're going to collaborate interdivisionally amongst the bureau to literally send resources where we need them, and it's my opinion is that at least at the beginning of these events, where the ground is still not saturated, so we don't have many mudslides yet, most of our problems will be tree related. So the Bureau will be using all of its resources to attack those areas like the tree problems where we're going to need to. Last week we had a little storm event. It lasted about 3 days, almost 600 emergencies. As I sit here today, almost every one of those emergencies is picked up and gone. So we've made a lot of strides towards collaborating interdivisionally in the Bureau, much better than we used to. And we've also had the customer relations management system now, which is helping us tremendously. We're no longer paper-based. We have people out there with tablets that are allowing us to get real-time information and move forward and actually attack these issues. So right now, if we don't have a 1,000-year event and it's only a 100-year event, I think the Bureau is pretty confident we will be able to handle it. Like we said in the emergency management meeting the other day on Friday, if we have a 1,000-year event and we have 40 or 50 inches of rain, I think the whole city is going to be struggling to keep up. So we're going to have to look at, like I said, maybe collaborating with the fire department's on-call contracts and seeing if we can get some outside forces in here to do work.
So if we have an event that we're not quite able to handle, we're still not looking at trying to bring back DWP tree trimmers on an emergency basis.
Councilman, I'll certainly look into that. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know if the city has the ability to call people back from the Department of Water and Power, because they'll have their own issues as well.
Right, it might take some collaboration. We might not be able to tell them to let them back, but it clearly would be something that would be in everybody's interest to handle as well as we can.
I will certainly get with the Department of Water and Power and see what we can do.
Very good.
Yes.
Mr. Koretz made me think about DWP, and it reminded me of a situation I had, I don't know, a year and a half ago in my district where I had the tops of some trees in neighborhoods being trimmed by DWP. I had the bottoms of some trees in the same neighborhood being trimmed by LAFD. And neither looked good when they were done because they were a partial job. And that happens in various places throughout the city. I understand that one of those agencies, I can't remember which, if the residents want, will actually accept money and they will do the whole tree or something like that. I can't remember if it's DWP or LAFD.
Yeah, I don't even want to go there. I would have to speak to them.
Is there any opportunity for us to increase efficiency if we know DWP is going in and they're trimming the tops of trees because it conflicts with power lines, or we know that LAFD is going in and they're trimming a certain area because a rig can't get through because the branches are too low, for us using some of our contract money so that we're actually doing the whole neighborhood the right way, so it's a complete project?
Okay, two questions. The LAFD, I think LAFD would be amenable to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they would be amenable to that, especially if we supplemented their funding with some of the money. I don't think there would be a problem there, and as I mentioned, I will be meeting with them about some other issues too. I can certainly broach that subject. As far as the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power is concerned, they have some their stipulations for what they use their money to do is very strict, and I know that, but I won't try to comment on what they can and cannot do. I'll certainly speak to them, and maybe we could have them come to this body and explain maybe if we could make that possible. But when I have broached the subject with them, I will just say that I haven't met with a lot of success.
Okay, thanks.
All right, anything else, members?
I'm sorry, just to follow up, I spoke with staff, and the report that the CEO is working on to compare the costs of tree trimming with contract staff versus city staff is under development and should be completed within the next 30 to 60 days.
Very good. Well, it sounds like we're on pace for our in-house hiring as we had budgeted it, and that's good news. This additional amount is what we had budgeted, and it's consistent with our previous instructions. So if there's no objection, we'll go ahead and advance the objection to advancing the recommendation of the department. Okay, the Bureau, rather. All right.
Thank you, council members.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay,
Excuse me,
that brings us next.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, excuse me. Will we be concurring with the recommendations from the Public Works Committee?
Well, just let me make sure I can distinguish that from the Bureau's recommendation. Was Public Works to?
The Public Works Committee amended the Bureau's report.
To hold the additional 1.5 billion in the million in the UB, was that?
To appropriate it. To appropriate it to contract.
That's consistent with
Yeah,
the Bureau.
we are going to concur.
Yeah, that's consistent with what the Bureau recommended.
Right.
Yeah, well then, in that case, yes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
They didn't, apparently. I think that was a mistake. There doesn't seem to have been a change. Okay. Okay, so that brings us next to our closed session items, which we'll take in the other room. But before we go back there, we have public comment on items 1, 2, 3, and 4 by Mr. Spindler. Mr. Spindler. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Spindler, we're continuing item number 1, so let's just go to 2, 3, and 4.
Okay.
Yes. Item 2 is a really nice lawsuit. Again, thank you to the attorneys. Vehicle Code Section 14602.6 is the tollway of the car for people that don't have a license to drive. Now, you know, who doesn't have a license to drive? Well, in the other room, Chairman Cedillo of the Housing Committee would note that people illegally here do not have a license to drive, and they should be allowed to drive anyway. So this lawsuit claims that 14602.6 violates the law. The Ninth Circuit actually went against that position, but now we seem to have a school of thought that it in fact does. So the attorneys want to be paid for their work. I agree, give them everything, and then give them an extra 10% for the good work. You can read online, there's an excellent editorial about the unconstitutionality of Vehicle Code Section 14602.6 and taking somebody's car for a minimum 30 days and charging them stowing fees on a non-felony. They're absolutely correct about that. Then we get to the police department, you can go tomorrow, they're having a meeting tomorrow at 9:30, and the police commission has meetings, and they don't talk about these incidences. They like to call them incidences involving members of the Los Angeles Police Department. But we do know Stephanie Banks was apparently involved in an incident, and she's going to be paid today. Now, how much is she going to be paid? I don't have the numbers here, but you're going to go in your little cloakroom back there, your 5x5 hiding room back there, and then you're going to tell us later how much she got. Whatever she gets, it isn't enough. And then we have the item 4, once again, our little friends at the police department doing something naughty to Danielle Wells, and she had to file a lawsuit. So that's the problem, is that these cases shouldn't even go to the point of filing a lawsuit. They file a claim for damages first, and you are not settling those claims quickly and accurately. What you're doing is you're forcing these people to hire expensive lawyers and file lawsuits and get case numbers, which are very, very expensive. You have to pay the attorney's fees for the claimant, and then the city has to have outside contracts to defend itself, because none of our city attorneys know how to litigate their ass out of a paper bag. So you could be saving millions of dollars by settling these cases before they reach the stage of having case numbers. And I'm disappointed. I continue to see this waste of money. So good luck, and I hope you get paid.
All right, thank you. Hold on, Mr. Spindler. We're also going to take your comments on items 7, 9, and 10, please.
Oh, okay. Yes, these are the continual drama. We have 7 deals with the reserve funds, loans, and recommendations to writing off loans. Well, why are we going to write off these loans? And the answer is because some of these people that own these loans are hooked into the system, the pay-to-play LA system. So, again, in the parking lots of the various places in Los Angeles County, they make these deals that certain loans get written off. And once the loan gets written off, if it's a corporation that's the debtor, they don't have to pay taxes, but if it's a personal loan, they would have to pay taxes on the write-off amount as income. So one of the things I like to do is put the name of the loan in behalf of a corporation or an LLC, and then it's a tax-free giveaway. So again, congratulations to these people who successfully got money from the city on a loan, and now they don't have to pay anything back. Yay! And then we get to number 9, where we're having problems having an audit engagement letter for the Sewer Construction and Maintenance Fund. Isn't that nice? They're having an engagement. They're going to engage in an audit. Isn't that nice? How come you can't just have a budget and just allocate the budget and not have these games but you have to play these games because it's more fun than actually fixing the sewers. You want to write reports. How much is it? No money here. I can't see it on the schedule. And then we have another controller report. See, that's Ron Galperin. See, we elected Ron Galperin as our controller, and ever since he went against Marcy Edwards in the DWP, he's basically in hiding right now. And there's reasons why, which I don't have enough time to go into, why he's in hiding. But if Ron were here, he would be doing these comprehensive reports about how the city could save money. The city's comprehensive financial report. We just did it. Miguel Santana came here and he had a big binder and he went over 3 hours of all of this. So everything in that report was already talked about. Miguel Santana told you exactly how much the money is in the city. There's $7.1 billion sitting in a checking account right now, losing 0.5% a month. It's because you're not investing the money. You're putting the money into garbage like T-bills, and then the people processing the paperwork are getting a 0.5% fee on top of that. That's why the money's losing money. And then you got to watch the LAUSD, because now they claim they've got a $7.1 million reserve fund. That's your money.
All right, thank you. Members, items 7, 8, 9, and 10 are appropriate for a resolution on consent, unless there's questions or concerns about any of those
So moved.
items. So items 7 and 8, the recommendation would be to approve the CAO's recommendations, and items 9 and 10 would be to note and file the controller's reports. Any objection? All right, seeing none, those items are approved. And that brings us to items 1 through 4, which we will take in closed session. Public comment, Mr. Spindler. Mr. Spindler is not in the room. Are there any other cards for public comment?
No, there is not.
Public comment is closed, and if there's no other item before this committee, we are adjourned.
Amen.